Okay, we'll get started in about 10 minutes on our topic, which is weaken the argument, critical reasoning questions. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to ask them or put them in the chat. Probably put them in the chat. I think the mics don't work for everyone, but you can definitely drop them in the chat and I'd be happy to discuss while we wait. Welcome. All right. We got a few more minutes. I mentioned earlier, but for any new people, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. If they're about this or if they're about general concerns about the exam, I'm happy to talk about whatever. Okay, let's get started. So we are going to do weekend the argument questions today for the GMAT. Just to start, there are a couple of things that come into play with critical reasoning kind of across the board, or at least for argument questions. So arguments on the GMAT are set up in a way that limits the potential areas of attack when we are trying to weaken the conclusion. It can be a little bit tricky to learn all the rules and to understand them in a way that you are applying them automatically. But this is actually a good thing because knowing what you can't change vastly decreases the amount of things you have to consider, and you will have plenty to consider even then. So background information, anything that sets the context of an argument, that is something that we must take as true. Premises or evidence that is used to support the conclusion must also be taken as true. So we can never argue with either of those things. Those are just things that we take as fact. The argument's conclusion is a statement of opinion. So we are trying to demonstrate through malicious variables that in the case of weakening, we are trying to demonstrate that the conclusion is unlikely or at least less likely. It doesn't have to be completely unlikely, just less likely than it would be otherwise, given the new information the correct answer provides us. So in weaken the argument, an answer choice will give us some new information that isn't part of the original argument, and that new information should make the conclusion less likely than it was before we had that new information. And assumptions, which is the gap between conclusions and supporting evidence, those are the only area where we are able to weaken arguments. So everything that's written down, we can't really argue with. We can't say that anything that's written is less likely, but there are going to be these assumptions between what the author uses to support their conclusion and their conclusion. And the unwritten assumptions that exist in that space are where we can weaken an argument by pointing out malicious variables, which are variables that the author failed to address in the argument. And we're going to work through 6 examples today. You'll get a few minutes with each question just to work on it on your own, and then we will discuss the answers together. If you have questions about the examples as we go, then feel free to ask them in the chat. If you have questions about sort of general test stuff, then I will hang out a little bit after the webinar is over and we can discuss any of those that you have. So let's get started with our first example. Okay. By restoring key previously long-standing relationships among various animal and plant species in the Yellowstone area of the United States, reintroducing wolves to the area resulted in a restoration of the area's ecosystem. Dingoes, which are wild dogs somewhat similar to wolves, have been missing from areas of Australia. Therefore, reintroducing dingoes where they have been missing in Australia would achieve results similar to those achieved by reintroducing wolves in the United States, restoring the ecosystem of the areas in which dingoes have been missing. So, first, the first thing is this is kind of how I would break it down. We know that reintroducing wolves to the to Yellowstone restored longstanding relationships among plant and animal species, which restored the area's ecosystem. Dingoes are similar to wolves, and dingoes have been missing in a similar way that wolves were missing from Yellowstone. Dingoes have been missing from areas of Australia. So if we reintroduce dingoes to those areas that they have been missing from, because they're similar to wolves, we might expect the same thing to happen in the Australian areas as far as restoring long-standing relationships among plant and animal species. So let's go through these choices. A. While dingoes and wolves descended from common ancestors, they have evolved separately for thousands of years. So, in this is something that the author has already considered. So, well, maybe not this exactly, but dingoes are somewhat similar to wolves. So the author isn't saying they're exactly the same. The author is saying they're somewhat similar. We might expect the same thing to happen. So even if dingoes and wolves have descended from common ancestors and they aren't perfectly similar, the author has already considered that they aren't perfectly similar. Also, just because they have evolved separately for thousands of years, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily super different from each other. It just means that they evolve separately. So you want to be careful not to spin stories about things that aren't being said. So, for instance, if you were like, oh, they must be quite different if they've evolved separately, that's going a little bit past what this answer says. Don't give this answer too much credit. B, in some areas of Australia where dingoes are not currently present, when dingoes were present, they killed livestock. So in the wolf example that we're setting up context with, reintroducing wolves to Yellowstone restored key previously long-standing relationships among various animal and plant species. That doesn't mean that the wolves weren't eating anything, and that doesn't mean that for this plan to work, the dingoes need to not eat livestock. They could still, even if they eat livestock, which would be bad for the owners of the livestock, ostensibly, that doesn't mean that their presence couldn't restore the ecosystem to these areas of Australia. So this one is talking about a problem that is a little bit different than the conclusion that we are talking about. This might be worse for the farmers' perspectives, but it's not, it doesn't weaken our conclusion about whether or not the dingoes could restore the ecosystems in Australia that they have been missing from. Because of the unstable nature of the climate in Australia, relationships among animals and plant species constantly change there. So, in Yellowstone, the relationships are long-standing. So, long-standing relationships among various animal and plant species. But in Australia, that doesn't seem to be the case. The relationships constantly change. So what this choice is doing is saying, hey, this comparison between Yellowstone in the United States and these areas in Australia might not be super valid. It could be that even if dingoes are the exact same as wolves in every way, the context of where we're reintroducing them could be so different that everything has evolved since they've been gone. So their place in the ecological hierarchy is just not there anymore. It has already evolved, so we can't expect the same thing would happen necessarily in Australia as happened in Yellowstone. So that one looks pretty good. Like wolves, dingoes serve as apex predators in areas in which they are present. This one kind of does a similar thing to this one where maybe that's supposed to sound bad, but that's just part of ecosystems. Like apex predators are just part of the ecosystem. They're at the top of the food chain, so that doesn't mean that the ecosystems couldn't be restored just because there is an apex predator involved. And efforts aimed at restoring ecosystems in Australia by eradicating species of animals not native to Australia have been largely unsuccessful. So this is talking about eradicating species, which is the opposite of reintroducing species to me, and of animals not native to Australia, which is the opposite of the dingoes, which I believe are native to Australia. Maybe we don't know that. Well, we don't know about the nativity, but eradicating species is not the same as it reintroducing species that have been missing, so that isn't talking about what we're talking about at all. So our best answer here is B. Show those results. Okay. Next question. Yeah, I don't know if they're native or not. It didn't say in the passage, so I went back and looked. You do want to be careful to not bring any external knowledge, though. Okay. Blades of Glory skating rink, one of the three skating rinks in Greenville, draws revenue from admissions and from food and drink concessions during its day and evening open skate sessions. Since most skaters do not buy food during the day, the food aspect of the concessions business has not been profitable during the daytime sessions. To increase the overall profitability of the rink management has decided to offer only drinks during daytime sessions. Our background is Blades of Glory is one of three skating rinks in town, and it draws revenue from admissions, but also from food and drink sales, both during the day and during the evening. But right now, food sales aren't profitable during the daytime, so their plan is to only offer drinks during the daytime session, and the goal of the plan is to increase overall profitability, which would be profit from food sales, drink sales, and admissions. Uh, With A, at some skating rinks, daytime food sales are a source of significant profits. Well, not at this one. So that is, yeah, the concessions business here has not been profitable. So that's not true of our skating rink. B, one hungry member of a group of skaters can influence the group's decision regarding which rink to go to. So there are two other skating rinks in town, and if what this choice says is true, then when groups of skaters go to the skate rink, even if they don't all buy food, if one person does want food when they go skate somewhere, they might choose to go to one of the other two rinks. Now, this choice does weaken the conclusion about profitability because there is a chance that this offsetting factor would offset so much that whatever money they're saving by not offering food during the day is eaten up by hungry members of groups persuading their groups to go to one of the other two skating rinks. Does this make the conclusion entirely impossible? No, but it does make it a little bit less likely. So that is our best choice so far. C, sometimes when people go to the rink's concession stands to buy drinks, they decide to buy food as well. I mean, even if that's true, I guess they could just buy drinks if food isn't available, so that one doesn't really have a clear impact. Many of the people who skate at Blades of Glory go during evening sessions on some days and during daytime sessions on others. Then they can get food when they go during the evening, and they can't get food when they go during the day. Apparently, that's not a problem since most people don't get food when they go during the day. And most people who would have bought both food and drinks at Blades of Glory will still buy drinks even if food is not available. This is a strengthener. It is saying that people that would have bought both will still buy the thing that they're offering. It's not like they won't buy anything. So this doesn't give us any reason to think that the plan will hurt profitability. So our best choice is B. And I will share those. Any questions on that one? Right. Example 3. Is it worth it to do a breakdown of every CR question into assumptions, like evidence and conclusion? I think it's worth it if you're learning, because that is how you can see if you are interpreting the argument correctly. It does take some extra time, but I think that a problem students run into a lot is that they think that they understand what's going on in the argument, and then they're trying to apply the questions and they just can't figure out how to do it. And writing down what you think is going on makes it a lot more static. So you can't be like, well, I thought the conclusion was this, and you were a little bit different. And then you're like, why can't I find an answer that fits? If you write down exactly what you think is going on, then later, if it turns out it was supposed to be something else, you have a record of what you thought, and you can train yourself to look for those gaps. So I think it's worth it. It's ultimately up to you, but I had a real hard time making progress at one point, and I finally started writing things down, and that really helped me like go to the next level as far as CR competence. All right. 3 years ago, the town of Amity renewed 2 blocks on its waterfront by replacing abandoned warehouses with green retail and restaurant space, with the result that the town was able to collect substantial sales taxes from the new businesses. There are 2 more blocks available for renewal on the waterfront. Therefore, the town of Amity can, by renewing the 2 available blocks, double the amount of sales tax revenue it will receive from businesses in waterfront renewal areas. So, 3 years ago, they did this thing. They replaced these old warehouses with green retail and restaurant spaces, and as a result, they were able to collect substantial sales taxes from the new businesses. Now there are 2 more blocks available for renewal on the waterfront. The conclusion is if they do the same thing that they did 3 years ago with these 2 new blocks, they will double the amount of sales tax revenue it receives from businesses in this particular waterfront renewal area. So they think that this plan will be at least as successful as it was 3 years ago. That is really important to note. There's a difference between, hey, I think that this will increase the amount of revenue, and hey, I think this will double the amount of revenue. The bar is a little bit higher here. So, okay. A, if property tax rates in Amity were increased slightly, the resulting additional revenue would exceed the revenue currently collected in sales taxes from the renewal area businesses. So we are only talking about sales tax revenue in this waterfront renewal area. So only sales tax from these specific businesses in the waterfront area in the areas that they are renewing. So this thing about property taxes, it's talking about revenue from somewhere else. It is off topic. Also, just because some other plan would work to achieve a goal to increase sales tax revenue in general, even if it was like a better plan, even if it would make the city 10 times as much sales tax revenue, that doesn't mean that this plan couldn't still double their sales tax revenue. So be careful about what the conclusion is saying. The fact that another plan is a better way to earn money does not mean that this plan won't work, just as it says it will. B, most of the restaurants in the waterfront area are filled to capacity every weekend. So this is a strengthener, I would say, because if the restaurants weren't filled to capacity every weekend, like they already weren't filled to capacity, then adding more, maybe there's not a demand for it, but since they're already filled to capacity, then maybe there is a demand and we could expect sales tax revenue to double. So this one's going in the opposite of the direction we're trying to go. B, the volume of restaurant and retail business decreases when the national economy slows down. Importantly with C, does this apply to Amity? We don't know what the national economy is doing. This is just a statement in general about the national economy of whatever nation Amity is in, ostensibly, but it is not any claim about what's going to happen if they renew these 2 blocks. For all we know, their economy is doing great. So that one is irrelevant. D, in the nearby town of Friendship, neither retail business nor restaurant business has ever been very strong. Well, that's really Friendship's problem. In Amity, it must be at least okay because they were able to significantly increase the amount of sales tax revenue they received after renewing those 2 blocks before. And E, since the completion of the first renewal project, it has become common for all streets leading to and in Amity's waterfront area to be congested with slow-moving traffic. So if the infrastructure of the waterfront area cannot support more shoppers and diners, then it seems a little bit bold to assume that they will be able to double the amount of sales tax revenue they receive from businesses by adding more businesses. It might be that there's not enough road for shoppers and diners to get down there. And so even if they added more, the streets are already at capacity. So this one is our weakener. And here's my best answer slide for those. Sure. So C is the one about how the national economy slows. We don't know if the national economy is going to slow. So that's just a statement about how the volume of restaurant and retail businesses decreases when the national economy slows. Does that apply to our situation? We're not sure. We don't have any reason to believe that it would or would not. So it has like no clear impact on the conclusion. Does that make sense? Excellent. All right. Next example. Okay. In accordance with Home Squad Real Estate Agency's new plan for increasing sales, each month, the agency will hold a contest such that the agent who has generated the most sales for that month will get, in addition to the standard sales commissions, a $10,000 bonus. Since that bonus will constitute a significant incentive for even the most productive of agents, having the contest will have a positive effect on the sales of the agency. So this is, hey, we're going to do this contest. Whoever sells the most gets this 10K bonus. The bonus is significant for all agents, even the most productive of agents. So it should be functioning as an incentive for every agent. And the conclusion is having a contest will have a positive effect on the agency's sales. Notice how this is different from the previous conclusion about doubling revenue. This is just saying a positive effect, any positive effect, $1 more, still meets the criteria of this conclusion. So it's much softer, I would say, as far as what it is asking for to be true. So A, the least productive agents at the Home Squad will only rarely see their incomes affected by the bonus. Does that mean that it can't help the agency have a positive effect on their sales? Not necessarily. In fact, not at all. Maybe those people will still try to work hard and get a little bit of extra sales. So that one is irrelevant. B, much of the sales success of the Home Squad agency has resulted from agents cooperating to generate sales. If only the person that does the most sales gets the money, then such a bonus structure might discourage cooperation and end up leading to fewer sales overall. This is an example of weakening an argument by showing that a plan has unintended consequences or could have unintended consequences that like undercut the goal of the plan. So that one's pretty good. The $10,000 is more than some agents' average monthly total commission from sales. We already know that it constitutes a significant incentive for even the most productive of agents, so we don't really need to know more than that is it is significant for everyone. D, the commission that an agent would receive for closing a particularly large sale would be much greater than the $10,000 bonus. They can have both. Like, it's not really a choice between one or the other. Maybe they close a particularly large sale and then they also sold the most and they get the bonus. No one's going to be sad about that. And E, the housing market in the area served by the Home Squad agency is not expected to be strong over the next few years. That doesn't mean that the bonus can't have a positive impact on sales. If sales are stronger with the bonus than they would be without the bonus, the bonus had a positive impact. So even if the housing market isn't great, it could still be true that there is a positive impact. Can I explain B again? Oh, so much of the sales success of the Home Squad agency has resulted from agents cooperating to generate sales. Only one person is going to get the bonus. So let's say like you worked at this office and you all worked together to get sales before the bonus came into play. And you were happy with that for whatever reason, but now there's this bonus and it only goes to the person that gets the most sales. So now you might be reticent to cooperate in that way that was getting you all this business because only one person gets the bonus. You're not going to share your tips with other people so that they can get the bonus. In that way, the plan might have an unintended consequence of making people less collaborative and more competitive. And so it might kind of undercut the collaborative environment here and have a negative impact on sales, even though the money would be an incentive for everyone. It would incentivize them away from the collaboration that has been part of their success in the past. Does that make more sense? but we know that it will. Why not D? We know that the bonus will have a big impact on their earnings because it says so in the passage. So for D, it's saying, hey, some people could get extra money from selling a particularly large or expensive house, but they could also get the bonus. And also, we know. So our passage is like our golden standard of what we have to follow. Anything that tries to undercut anything in our passage is just a no-go. We call it trying to disagree with a premise or trying to weaken a premise. You can't weaken a premise. All right, any other questions about that one? Okay, let's try this one. And I'll share these. I don't know, I didn't do an online exam, but I definitely laugh at some of the passage stuff because it's just so silly. So I feel like they should be understanding of that. Why is it so absurd if they don't want you to enjoy yourself? Also, testing is hard enough. Like, have fun with it if you can. Okay. Box office revenue from fantasy genre movies was at an all-time high last year, while the total sales revenue from fantasy genre books significantly decreased. Likely, this disparity occurred because potential fantasy book readers opted to watch fantasy movies instead. So this argument is pretty simple. Revenue from movies is at an all-time high, revenue from books significantly low, and the disparity, according to the author, occurred because potential fantasy book readers opted to watch movies instead. Let's Noting a history of consistently high sales in the fantasy book genre, marketers of fantasy films last year targeted potential fantasy book buyers. So our conclusion is that people are choosing to watch fantasy movies instead of reading books. This is just a strengthener for that. If marketers are targeting people that would have been buying books to come see their films, that makes sense with the author's conclusion. Enthusiasts of the fantasy genre increasingly prefer the communal nature of maybe watching to the solitary nature of reading a book. This is also a strengthener. If they prefer watching movies, then probably potential book readers did opt to watch movies instead. Many fantasy book publishing and film studios garner marketing funds from the same sources, which have limited funds to allocate. So we know that movie sales are at an all-time high and that book sales are significantly decreased. Even if there is limited funds and it's all going to movies or it's all going to books, we already know more from the passage than anything we could learn from this answer. We already know the behaviors and that's what we care about, not whatever is going on with marketing. So this one's just like, it seems irrelevant, but it's really just off topic and it does not have a clear impact. Lending programs at libraries significantly increased their inventory of newly released fantasy books as a result of the high box office sales of fantasy movies. So the author is saying that people, instead of reading books, are opting to watch movies based on the fact that sales revenue from books significantly decreased. But if libraries are buying these books, thanks to the popularity of movies, then every book's worth of revenue that goes to the library and gets borrowed by multiple people is less revenue for that book. Instead of buying, say, like I buy a book for myself and I read it, so they got one book's revenue from my reading it and one person read it. Whereas if it's at the library and they buy one book's worth and then like 50 people read it, then lots of people are still reading even if revenue is significantly lower. So that is a logical flaw in this argument. The author assumes that lower sales revenue from books means less people are reading books, but you can also get books from the library. And e-fantasy book exchanges that facilitate low or no cost trading of fantasy books between readers of the books saw no increase in volume last year. So this one, if they did see an increase in volume, that could weaken the argument just the same as D does, but since it says they saw no increase in volume last year, this would actually also strengthen the argument. So that is not what we're trying to do. Any questions about that one? And then this is my last one. We might run a little bit over, so if you have to leave, that's fine. Could I say that C weakens the argument because they made more movies and not more books? That's not what C says, though. It says many fantasy book publishing and film studios garner marketing funds from the same sources. So that's just funds that they use to market the films or market the books, not the films or books being made. Because people are probably still writing the same amount of books. I would think people write books even if no one's reading them. Tons of people publish terrible books every year just for their own amusement. So, and people publish good books, but it's harder work. Mhm. Hi. Bans on smoking inside public establishments have been shown to be more effective at reducing per capita cigarette sales in colder climates than in warmer ones. Boselton, which is located on the shore of a large lake, experiences a lake effect that makes it significantly colder than other cities in its country. Therefore, it's clear that of the cities in its country, Bozelton is the one that will experience the greatest per capita reduction in cigarette sales as the result of a soon-to-be enacted countywide, no, those were counties. It's older than other cities in its county. And so they're expecting that of the cities in its county, Bozelton is the one that will experience the greatest per capita reduction in cigarette sales as the result of a soon-to-be enacted countywide ban on smoking in public establishments. All of the following, if true, weaken the argument except. So 4 weakeners and 1 something else, strengthener or just neutral. So our breakdown is, hey, these bans tend to work better in colder places than in warmer places. Bozelton is relatively cold, therefore Bozelton is the place that will work the best, lead to the greatest decrease in per capita cigarette sales. So we are going to go through each weakener and look at why. A, Bozelton is known for its unique success in getting people to quit smoking through a program that has enabled all but the most diehard smokers living there to quit. Let's think about what that means. That means that the people that remain there, they've already gotten all the easy ones. The people that are left are the most diehard smokers. So it's not like every person is equally as likely to quit smoking. All the people that were more likely to be receptive to not smoking, they've already quit. The only ones left are the diehard smokers, and they're going to have a harder time quitting smoking. So that weakens the conclusion about the author expecting Bozelton to have the most success. B, in comparison with residents of other cities in the county, residents of Bozelton spend a much smaller proportion of their time in public establishments. This ban is for smoking inside of public establishments. If the people here, let's say no one in Bozelton spends any time in any public establishments, will this law have any impact? Probably not, because if it doesn't apply to them wherever they are, then they won't even notice it. It's only a deterrent if you have to change your behavior. If they're already not going to places, then they don't have to change their behavior. So if the people in Bozelton spend a much smaller proportion of their time in public establishments, then they are much less likely to be affected by the ban than other public establishments in the county, in other cities. In Bozelton, unlike in other cities in the county, it is generally the case that people who smoke are not the same people who tend to frequent public establishments. This one has the same problem. Even if plenty of people go to public establishments, if those aren't the people smoking and the people that are smoking are not going into public establishments, does this law matter to them? Probably not. Probably they'll just keep living their life the way they have been. E, unlike most public establishments located in other cities in the county, few in Bozelton currently allow people to smoke inside. This one has the same issue as well. If the places already have this law, like this is a law that they're putting in, a countywide ban. But if the businesses in Bozelton like already have this rule in place as private businesses, then the people that go there are unlikely to change their behavior because they're already not smoking inside. If this one doesn't weaken as much as the other ones, because it could be that the few that do allow people to smoke inside, still there could be a bit of an impact, but it does make the conclusion a little bit less likely. So, and that is something about accept questions in general, is that typically all the answers aren't equally as like strong and obvious because there's only so many like excellent answers or like really obvious and clear answers. So that is something to keep in mind, especially when you're talking about like find the conclusion questions. There's only so many perfect conclusions. Some of them will be like still okay, but not as good as others. Don't compare them too stringently against each other. And that leaves us with B, a significant countywide increase in taxes on cigarettes will go into effect simultaneously with the ban. Our conclusion is not about this. It is about the ban on smoking inside. So even if this happens, does that mean that Boselton is the most likely to have success? No, it doesn't tell us anything about it. This is just a different tax that's countywide. It should affect all the counties equally as much as far as we know. So that's why that one is our accept answer. Any questions about that one? Or anything else, because we are done. So if you have any questions. In CR, if we go through the questions first before reading the passage, does that really help in getting the questions answered? Like if we go through the answer choices first before reading the passage, it's kind of a double-edged sword because if you read the answers first, sometimes they can, well, you don't really know what you're looking for if you haven't read the passage. You don't really know the situation. So you might subconsciously like favor one of the answer choices and then try to make the passage fit into that, even if it's not the best fit. So I would recommend against reading the answer choices first because the context is really important in CR questions, and minimizing your prejudice against answers for like invalid or not strong reasons is a big part of success. Not the answer choices, I mean the question. Oh, the question stem, sorry. In CR, if you go through the question stem first before reading the passage, does it really help in getting the question answered? Honestly, like that could be fine. It's up to you. If you just want to know, hey, like what are they looking at, then that could help you kind of structure your reading in that way. I would say that you kind of read a lot of the questions in a similar way. At least the ones that are arguments, and that's going to be most of the ones that you run into. You kind of read them a similar way. You are looking for weaknesses. Are you looking for weak areas to prod at and make the conclusion weaker, or are you looking for weak areas to like catch up with other facts and make the conclusion stronger? It's really the same thing. You're really always reading kind of looking for problems. But for other types of questions like paradoxes, that might help you kind of prime your brain to know what to look for. For some, it doesn't matter. Like the bold-faced ones, you probably know what the question is about the second you glance at it, or not find the conclusion, but like complete the passage. Those ones are also, those two types are really popular, and you don't have to read the question stem. It will be immediately apparent what you're looking for. But yeah, definitely try reading the question stem and see if that sort of helps you with your mixed sets. Set your expectations for what to look for. Did you expect to get an 805 in your test, and how did it feel? I did not expect to get an 805. I mean, you know, I expected it a little bit, the way you're always like, wouldn't this be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if I just did great and there was no issues? Like you always kind of expect, not expect, but hope that things go really well. And I was kind of surprised when it happened, even though I had that hope. But I would say it worked out really well because I tend to overthink things, and so I feel like that was, for my peace of mind, a really nice experience to get a perfect score because I was like, well, I couldn't have done any better than that, so I don't have to dwell on these questions that I missed for like the next 10 years and be like, why did I miss that? I just get to move on. So that was stellar, would recommend. But yeah, you should also go in with high hopes. I think it's a little bit helpful. You got to be flexible. You don't want to be sad if you let yourself down from an impossible dream, but it's okay to dream really high as long as you're doing it in a positive way. What's your best advice for someone looking to write GMAT in a month with a 9-to-5 job? This individual started intense studies a week ago, has all the materials and family duties as well. if you were trying to work full time and prep for the GMAT and you have a family, you are going to have to set some expectations probably with yourself and with your family, definitely with yourself and probably with your family as well, because if you're working full time and you can't like do anything at work, like if you just work in an office and your office job is to just sit around, or you work night security or something and you have a lot of time on the computer, you can maybe do some studying then. But like if you actually work and you need to focus on your work all day, Monday to Friday, and you also have a family and you also want to study, then you need every free minute and all of the mental resources that you can spare for the GMAT if your timeline is only a few weeks. So I would like talk to your partner, be like, can you cook dinner for us for the next several weeks? Is that okay? Can you take over like some of the stuff with our children, for instance? Can you work out a deal with like our dog sitter? Because basically, like, I'll spend some time with you, but my main focus needs to be this until I'm too tired to do it. And you also don't want to sacrifice too much of like your sleep or your exercise, because if you're healthy and well rested, it's much, much, much easier to learn and retain this information. So I would just make it clear to yourself and to your family that like if that's what you're going to do for the next 6 weeks, then you're not going out for drinks with your friends, like you're not going to any shows or museums or anything fun. Like this is probably what you're doing, and it's probably going to be pretty intense, so don't get down on yourself if you feel tired or like irritable, because you might. It can be very challenging to study for the GMAT. It can be more discouraging than most regular life things. You don't really fail so obviously at things in your day-to-day life. I feel like the way that you will fail a question and it will be like, no, you were wrong. And that can be kind of hard if you're out of practice with it. How long did it take me to prepare? I did about 9 months of study. Mostly on TTP, but the last like 4 to 6 weeks, still a little bit of TTP, just like reading through my notes and stuff. But the last 4 to 6 weeks were mostly for mocks and reviewing the mocks. And then like if there were concepts, I didn't remember like going through the course and looking at them. But yeah, I spent a long time. I spent 9 months. Oh, someone was asking about, can you do the whiteboard, the virtual whiteboard during the virtual section, or the virtual whiteboard during the verbal section? Yes, you can. You can use it during quant DI and verbal. And so if you hate your handwriting or something, you can just type your notes if you want to do it that way. Sometimes that's nice. While taking the real test at the test center, if we think that we are taking a mock test, would this mindset really help in cooling our nerves? It might. That's also a really good question. If that helps you take the pressure off, and it depends on how you feel about pressure, like, which I think at a certain level of pressure, if it's high for you, that it's going to be bad, but if it's like medium to high and that motivates you, that could be good. If having a lot of like stakes makes you nervous, if you wanted to pretend that it was a mock while you were there, then, and that helped you, then you could see what you could do if you have mocks left is to pretend that there's a real test and then see if that makes you more nervous. And if it does, maybe it would be true in reverse to just go in there and be like, whatever, just another mock that I'm doing in this weird cold room I've never been in before. But yeah, if you think that'll work, whatever works for you, even if it seems silly, if it works, it works. Go for it. It's worth trying. Were your scores to the practice test close to your final GMAT score? My scores for the mocks were kind of a range. I think my lowest one was a 615 and my highest one was like a 715. So some people have even more of a range, but I did not get a perfect score on any of my mocks. Though one thing to keep in mind is that the difference between like a 705 or a 755 and an 805 is usually a couple of questions. So the scores are really sensitive on the high end. It's not like, oh, from 605 to 705 is the exact same as from 705 to 805. No, it is not. It's very sensitive at the high end. A 705 is almost like an 805. And so yeah, I didn't have anything higher than a 715, but once I kind of understood how many questions you were allowed to miss at those higher levels, how few I should say, how few questions, then I was kind of like, oh, all right. But also, some of it is just a bit of luck in the questions you get and how you're feeling that day. And so if you get like a 715, then I would not necessarily try to go back unless you just love taking the test to see if you can get one where you miss none, because sometimes the batch of questions is just always going to have like one that's tricky, at least. Which one is better, center or home test? I think that it depends on the person. I like going to the center because I know that people that take the tests at home sometimes have issues with, like your Wi-Fi goes out, or like your proctor is late, or stuff that maybe like you didn't have any control over, or if you have a family and they don't respect your boundaries, or if you don't have a good like space set up and so you're trying to do it on your couch and you're just like a little bit uncomfortable, then I think all of that stuff, I would rather just go to the test center. I have a lot of experience in test centers. I remember walking into the test center for this and being like, oh yeah, they're all the same, have been for 20 years, the exact same, like weird gray offices full of cubicles. So that kind of helped me get into the mindset of like, yep, it's a test in a center. But if going to the center is going to put like a lot of pressure on you, or going to make you anxious, or or it's just hard and expensive to get there, or time consuming, then it might be worth it to take it at home. Only you can really make that choice for yourself. But I would definitely consider both. And if you can, like, check out the center and see if it seems like something that's viable for you or helpful, or if you can't even check it out before you go for the test, then maybe it's too hard to get there and you shouldn't expect to go there for the test. Uh, you have a great weekend as well. Yes. Started solving mocks, and solving correctly gets you tougher questions, but then they screw my timing for that section. Any suggestions? So it's kind of there's a couple of things. So harder questions will take longer, but you can only have so many. So you want to kind of get to the point where an easy question, you can do it in under 2 minutes, maybe a minute or 90 seconds, and a medium question about 2 minutes, and then a harder question, maybe like 2 to 3 minutes. If you're still not having enough time to solve all the harder questions that you're getting, then you'll just have to practice and see if you can cut down your time more. A lot of it does just decrease with practice. You get used to saying the questions, you get used to thinking of what you need to do, you get used to organizing your thoughts, you get used to making notes in your notebook. It all gets like a little bit more efficient. I mean, it's like anything else. It's like riding a bike, except for you could probably forget how to do it. It's like driving a car. The more that you do it, probably the more automatic it comes to you. And so you do want harder questions, but you do also want to balance your time, and you never want to leave questions unanswered, even if you're just blind guessing. If you see that you have 5 minutes left in the section and you've got whatever, like 5 questions, then go through and read each one for a minute and make your best guess and move on. But don't be like, oh, I've got 5 minutes and 5 questions. Let me see if I can do this one. And then spend so long on that one that you leave any blank, because a wrong question is worth more points than a blank question. A blank question will penalize you really harshly. Any other questions? And also, if you're running out of time, you might look at, there is some timing strategies. So I know one is to like split your notebook into quadrants and then check the time like at every quadrant. So even knowing how often you need to check the clock can be helpful. And there are a couple of different like recommendations for that. If you guess on a question and bookmark it, but it's wrong, does it make the next question easier? So that is an excellent question. In the old GMAT, before they did the change a couple years ago, there were more questions per section. There was like 36 quant and 36 verbal instead of 20 and 23. But they were way more responsive. So like if you missed one, then you would immediately get an easier one. If you got one correct, you would immediately get a harder one. With the new test, there are less, and you can bookmark them and then like go back and change them, but they're not as responsive as they used to be. So just because like you miss a medium, that doesn't knock you all the way down to easy every time, because you might go back and review it and change your answer. So it's way less like volatile than it used to be. But a lot of the advice that you see out there is from the old version, or even like a lot of instructors and people on the YouTube or whatever, like they haven't taken the new version of the test. Like that's the one I took, and I took the new version, but I took it like right after it came out. So if you took your test before I took my test, then you probably did take the old version. So a lot of the strategy and stuff is from that previous way more reactive version, and not from this one that's like a little bit smoothed out instead of volatile. And so does it immediately make the next question easier? Like soft, maybe. Maybe it will. Maybe it'll be like, we'll see. But you can only change 3 questions. So if you miss like several, if you miss 4, then you are definitely going to be getting easier questions because you won't be able to change all of those. Anything else? And the only other thing about that is you can't always accurately assess how hard the questions are, so don't waste too much time being like, oh, is it hard? Is it easy? Is it medium? Is it harder than the last one? Is it easier than the last one? Like, the people that decide that probably have rubrics that you can't even fathom. And also it's probably a matter of opinion to some degree, so just let that go a little bit and try to be present with your current question. All right, thank you all so much. I believe I will be back next week. Um, I believe it will also be on Friday though. I have a very weird busy day Thursday. There's going to be like a conference that I have to go to. So I think it will also be Friday. I hope that works for you all. I'm so glad that you find my success inspirational. I do love to be an inspiration. Success is better when it's shared. So I hope that you all can just really knock it out of the park. And if you get perfect scores, then we can go on panels together. Won't that be fun? I think it would be fun. So let's do it. Thank you.